This is an interview with Shirley Stoffick for the Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor Oral History Project titled Women at Work. The interview is being conducted at the Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor, known as the Steel Museum, on April 12, 2023. My name's Nicole Marino. Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
Hi. To begin, where did you and your family live when you were growing up?
Hartford.
Mm-hmm. And what did your parents do for a living?
My mom's a nurse, and my dad, kind of jack of all trades, was a milkman, a truck driver, a carpenter, and also ran equipment.
Sure. Where did you go to high school?
Joseph Badger.
Okay. When did you graduate?
83.
And what did you do after high school?
I was a waitress and bounced around to a million different jobs. Mm-hmm. Florist, waitress, pet store. Then I went to nursing school, became a nurse, was a nurse for 10 years.
Okay.
And that's when they kept cutting back and short staff and overworked, and this was a bet with my brother to join the operators. So
you did.
I decided to change careers and play outside.
Okay. So waitressing was your very first job. And you mentioned a few other things you did right out of high school. How long was it between then and when you joined the operators?
I joined the operators in 2001.
Okay. And did you go to college at all after school?
I did, a year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that it seems like you were nursing for a while. How long did you do that?
About 10 years.
About 10 years. And then you've been working with the operators for how long then?
22 years.
Sure. All right. How did you get your job? And you can
as far
refer
as
to
in the operators.
Sure.
Joined the apprenticeship program.
Mm-hmm.
You put in an application, and then you go to Pittsburgh and take a test, and then they pick whoever scores the highest. Out of when we went, there was like 1,600 people that took the test, and they took 60 of us.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
So then, they take twice that many, they interview everybody, and then they pull 60 out of what's left.
Okay. Was it, and when you think back to going into nursing, what was that like?
My mom was a nurse. Both her aunts were nurses, or both her sisters were nurses. So I was just always going to be a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I was a medical secretary for a while, and then I worked in the medical field, and I worked in the hospitals and volunteered in the hospitals, and then went to college for a year for nursing.
Mm-hmm.
Decided I wasn't ready for college. So quit that and just went to work. Had 2 kids and decided, no, you need a career. So I went back, got my degree down here at Chauvin.
Okay.
Got my nursing degree.
So obviously you were kind of destined for nursing from your family upbringing, but what led you to seek out employment with the operators and changing your track?
I guess I've always enjoyed being outside. My grandpa was a landscaper, and I used to always go out and help him, even when I was little. And then my dad also had equipment at the house, and that was kind of something we did on the side. And I just enjoyed being outside. But I had 2 brothers, so I was always the one with the shovel in the ditch, or the gopher, or
Gotcha. What type of training did you receive, or what was needed? Think about the operators.
It's a 4-year apprenticeship. So you go to class 2 weeks, and then you have 4 weeks of field training every year.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of your schooling you get on the jobs. They hire you as a first-year apprentice, second year, whatnot. So they have some idea of how much knowledge you have or don't have. And then they kind of train you accordingly out on the job sites.
Okay. And they pair you with somebody that,
right.
Okay, that educates you? Yeah, I didn't understand that before. Did you find that training to be sufficient, satisfying? I'm sorry, let me ask it this way. Did you find that training to be sufficient, satisfactory, or lacking?
Depends on the job and the companies.
Mm-hmm.
Some jobs were very open, helpful. You know, can you run this? No. Okay, get on it and we'll show you how.
Okay.
So, bend over backwards, accommodating, fantastic. When I got in, some of the guys were like, you know, you're on your own. If you don't know what you're doing, too bad. Sucks to be you. Mm-hmm. You know, go back home where you belong.
Okay. And that basically was your apprenticeship. And your apprenticeship sounds like it was in steps, like depending on the year of the apprenticeship.
Right.
Okay. And what specific kind of work did you do at your job?
I run all the different kinds of equipment.
Okay.
So, depending on the job, whether you're doing buildings or roads or whatever you're doing, every job's different, mm-hmm. which keeps it fun too.
Good. I guess explain a couple of the different machines for me that you run, because I don't really understand them.
Okay. Like I run an excavator.
Okay.
And you can do all kinds of things with that. I mean, anything from digging foundations to loading trucks to taking the bucket off and using it as a crane. Picking things up, holding them, setting pipe, putting pipe in a ditch.
Okay.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
Other jobs, you're on a dozer, you're running grade, pushing off or pushing up to the excavator so the excavator can keep loading out for a dozer or whatever. I've also done asphalt, which is mainly a roller.
Mm-hmm.
Is rolling the hot asphalt. There's backhoes. They use those to dig out whatever the mill doesn't get. A backhoe you can use in the dirt too.
Okay. Very good. When you began, what position did you start at?
As like first year apprentice.
Yeah.
So
that goes, how many years of apprenticeship do you typically?
There's 4.
4 years. Okay. And then after that, are you a journeyman then? Is journeyman got a set number of years also?
No.
No. Just until, do you have a test, or how do you graduate beyond?
To become a journeyman, you have to have, they consider 3 major pieces of equipment, and then you have to have, I think it's 4 or 5 minors, which the minors are like your roller, a loader, stuff that pretty much anybody can get in and figure out. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're simpler pieces of equipment, you know. And then your majors are your dozer, so you know how to run grade, you know, your excavator that you can know how to level yourself up and actually dig a foundation, or
that makes sense.
The cranes and, you know, things that take a little more skill. You can't just jump in and yeah,
fiddle about until you
figure it out.
Yeah. Sure. And so it seems like you're able to move up to more skilled positions the more that you learn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. is anything, is any of your job trajectory controlled by seniority?
Not really.
Okay. And do you ever have to bid on open positions if you want to make a change?
Mm-mm.
Okay. And is there any official further education beyond?
You can always go back up to the training site. Like if you're not proficient on a crane and you want to run cranes, you can go up and they've got more classes. You know, if depending on what work is coming up or going on in the area, like they have tow motor training and they have, you know, lull training, and they have the small hydraulic cranes which they use inside the building.
Mm-hmm.
They have training for all that. So, you know, if like Lordstown would open up and put a new line in and they needed more small hydraulic cranes, you can always go up to the job site or up to the training site and take those classes and qualify in that and then get your certification.
Okay.
To get that, you don't necessarily need that to graduate to become a journeyman.
Okay.
But you can always go back and get whatever you didn't get along the way.
To expand your
Right.
your marketability,
Right.
for lack of a better
Right.
term. Do they give you a heads up when they think something is coming up? Does the union kind of know what's on the horizon?
Yeah.
To give you an opportunity
Yeah.
to go and.
Because when the contractors come in to bid something or they know something's coming up, when they purchase the land and they're in the know, like right now.
Sure.
So then it depends on what contractors get the job,
Okay.
whether they're union contractors or they're non-union contractors. And if it goes union, then they know we're going to need X amount of hoe operators, dozer operators, or it's an inside job and we're going to need tow motors and forklifts. And
They have a scope of work well in advance, which
Right.
would allow you to.
Right.
Okay. And did you learn enough on the job as you were going, or have you been back to do some of those other trainings for yourself?
I mean, forklift you have to take every 4 years.
Okay.
Just to keep your skills up. And, you know, a crane you have to take your certification and you have to retest every couple years just to make sure you're still competent.
Sure.
It's
Okay.
kind of like a driver's license. You have to go retest and, you know, make sure you
Make
still
sure
have
you're
the
safe.
ability. And if the equipment has really changed, it also kind of gives you a new update on, you know, this is the newer equipment and this is how this runs.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Sure. So talk about your job and the conditions. For example, describe a typical day and whatever challenges you may meet in it, any random day.
Weather
Okay.
is probably the biggest challenge. I mean, we live by the weather. Because once you get out of your car in the morning, I mean, you need to have whatever you may possibly need.
For all day.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you know, if there's a stray rain cloud out there somewhere and you end up soaking wet and you don't have a change of clothes in your car, you're wet for the day.
Since you do work outside, are there ever any conditions wherein work is just not going to happen on this day?
Yeah, depending on the job.
Okay.
Now, some jobs, if you're in a dirt job and it's solely a dirt job, yes, you get rain days.
Okay.
Asphalt, you get rain days because you can't lay asphalt, you know, if the pavement's soaking wet because it won't adhere.
Sure.
But if you're milling the old asphalt, you need the water.
Okay.
So there's no rain days.
Okay.
Unless it's an absolute downpour and it's, you know, beyond reason.
Okay. On those rare occasions where the weather is such that just work is not going to happen, what happens to you for your day's worth of job? Like, what happens for your work?
You get a minimum of a 2-hour show up.
Okay.
If you start your equipment, you start to work, you usually get 4 hours. if you go past the 4 hours, then you usually get paid for a full day anyhow, even if it's a rain out at any point.
Okay.
Other than that, you just get a free day off and nobody knows you're home.
All right. Oh, well, that sounds like a good
And they are wonderful.
Okay, so describe a moment at work that was not part of a typical day and how you were able to overcome that experience. So if you had any kind of challenges that weren't typical challenges, if you have a day that you can think of.
I mean, everything's kind of typical, but not typical. So, I mean, it depends on what contractor you're working with, what trades you're working with, because we have to work with all the different trades. The pipe fitters and the iron workers and the electricians, and we do all their work for them, all their heavy work for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it all depends on the guys you're working with, whether they know what they're doing or don't know what they're doing, or, they think they know what they're doing. It's, I mean, nothing is typical in that job. It can be just loading trucks, but, one of the trucks hits a sinkhole and buries itself, or, I mean, there's never a normal, just
So challenges aren't
typical day.
The challenges aren't unusual, and there's
Right.
nothing that really stands out as this one
Right.
day this
No.
crazy thing happened. Okay,
No,
that's fair.
Because you just never, there's never a typical day.
That's probably nice,
It is. It keeps everything interesting.
right? What hours and shifts do you work?
I work day turn.
Day turn. Have you ever had to do? Have you ever had to do rotation of shifts?
Not rotation, but some jobs are bid midnights.
Oh.
Like paving jobs. Some, like if you're paving Route 11, they'll only let you do it at night because there's less traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're on the midnight shift. But, it happens, but not real regularly.
Okay.
But our day turn is also anywhere from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay.
So we work,
There's a larger span.
yeah, we work 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. A calendar
Especially-
day.
Yeah, yeah, right. Especially during the summer,
Right. And do you bid on jobs that you want? Do you get to pick and choose? You're part of, or they kind of suggest to
They
you?
just call and say, hey, I need so-and-so at Lordstown needs a tow motor.
And you're qualified and you're on that list, and they say,
And
okay, you're
you're
next, Shirley.
on the list.
Okay. Which shift do you prefer and why?
Day turn.
I think it's been very clear that you really like to be outside in the sun, and
Yeah.
I can totally
Yeah.
appreciate that.
My staying up all night is way past. And when the sun's up, I want to be up.
Yeah.
I don't sleep good during the day, so I get cranky.
Fair enough. What was the working relationship like with your coworkers, men or women? Or what is your working relationship like with your coworkers?
Most of the time, it's really, really good. I get along with most of the guys out there. You're always going to butt heads with somebody, but for the most part, the job we're on is a really good job, and everybody seems to really get along. You could always get your few that, you're still a female and you still don't know what you're doing, and, you shouldn't be out here, or he can do it better. And you just prove them wrong.
How many women typically do you work with at a job site?
Typically, the smaller jobs, there's usually only one, maybe two to a job.
Okay.
So a lot of jobs you're on there by yourself.
You might be the only one.
You get bigger jobs like the battery plant where we're at now, there's thousands of people out there. We've got a couple thousand workers out there. So those, we've got a really good handful of girls out there.
Mm-hmm.
But on the norm, you're lucky if you've got anybody else, let alone a couple of you.
Let alone more than. Okay. And are you able to get along with women just as well as with men? Or are there
I usually get along with the guys better.
I was going to ask, are there times where it's almost more challenging to get along with women sometimes? Or
Sometimes. Most of the girls that we've got in now really support each other, and because we've all been there when it was cutthroat, so we all kind of need to have each other's back.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same sense, you're still trying to prove that you can do it.
Yeah.
On your own.
Makes sense. How does management or administration treat workers?
This job, phenomenally.
Okay. Any other thing in your past that you think maybe it wasn't good?
Yeah, I mean, you've always got your certain contractors that just, think they're almighty, and, you're just, do this and do it my way, or like, oh, okay, but that's not going to work, and they don't want you to tell them, hey, or you're not going fast enough. Dig faster. You need to dig fast. Well, we're going to run into issues if we start not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to hear it until you run into something, and then it's, well, now.
Now what?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your strategy when you run into that kind of situation, when you have them?
I mean, you voice your concerns, and if they insist you do it, then you just say, that's fine. You want me to do it this way? This is the way we're going to do it. And, that way if something goes south, then this is exactly what you told me to do.
Yep. Sounds good. Did you ever go through any strikes while you were on the job?
We have been really fortunate. We've been really good since I've been in.
All right. And have you ever had to report any grievances for yourself or for someone else?
No.
What do you enjoy the most about your job?
Being outside.
And what do you enjoy the least about your job?
Some of the attitudes. They can get old real fast sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Do you run into it a lot for you?
It depends on the job. Like this job, I've been out there 3 years now. It's really, really good. I mean, really good. But I've been on jobs that you just can't do anything right. You can't do anything fast enough. It just doesn't matter what you do or don't do.
Because it's about it. And is it for everybody or is it for you?
Yes and yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Some contractors are just never happy.
No matter who the staff is. Okay.
And some contractors, it's because I'm a female.
Okay.
You'll come out and you'll say, good morning, I'm, your new operator. Well, have you ever ran one of these before? No, I pulled it up on YouTube last night and I watched the video. I'll see if I can figure it out for you. And they stand there and look at you like you're totally serious. I'm like, dude, you asked for a hoe operator. They sent out a hoe operator.
Yeah.
I didn't just show up one morning and say, I think I'll walk on this job and see what I can.
Yeah.
You know, it just amazes me sometimes, but that's half the fun of it, you know. You just get out there and do your thing, and then it's usually okay.
Okay. So we've kind of touched on this, but we're talking about the atmosphere for work for women at the workplace, and obviously you've been, because of the nature of your job, you're at a lot of different places. So it sounds like your position now is great, and there have been some other things in the past. What maybe talk about some of the examples of how men are supportive and encouraging on the good places, and then we'll talk about not so much. Maybe we'll do that. How about that?
I mean, some of the guys bend over backwards to help you. I mean, they would do anything. At the end of the night, you clean your tracks. You get in wet, sticky mud and stuff. It's heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff that we just can't physically do like a guy does. Some guys will stand back and watch you struggle and fight, and they'll have their tracks cleaned in 10 minutes, and they'll walk to the car and, you know, do their thing. And, you know, but then there's just as many, well, I should say, nowadays there's more guys that are more willing to come over and give you a hand or help you out, or, you know, if you're changing buckets or changing something on the, you know, equipment, whatever, and you're just not tall enough, you're not strong enough, you can't pick it up over your head like the guys can.
Right.
You can't carry a 4-foot sheet of plywood like the guys can.
Right.
You know, if they see that you're actually doing your job and trying to do what you need to do, the majority of them nowadays are willing to come give you a hand, because they know you'll also pitch in and give them a hand down the road, or, you know, whatever.
Sure. It seems like these would be the same guys that would help the other guys when they're kind of in the weeds too.
Right.
Does that seem accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so conversely, so what are some examples of how a man would make things more difficult?
It just, you know, well, that's your job. You should be able to do that. If you want to run this piece of equipment, you should be able to do, you know, whatever you need to. Well, I can do it, but it's just going to take me longer. I'm, you know.
Sure.
And they'll just stand there and watch you, you know, or they'll watch you struggle, and, you know. And we can't always do things the way the guys do them. But we usually figure out a way, right, wrong, or different, but we usually figure out a different way to approach it and still get it done.
Does anybody ever give you grief about, like, because I totally understand that, right? Because sometimes we approach a problem in a different way because our abilities are not the same.
Right.
Does anybody ever give you grief about doing it in a different way?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Like, a lot of guys, when the job first started out at the battery plant, we were loading out a bunch of mud, and they were taking mats and they were sitting on top of the pile where you put, like railroad ties, they tie them together, and you sit them up on top so you can set the tracks in it so you don't sink down through the mud.
Sure.
And then they're loading off the top of the pile into the trucks. Well, I wasn't comfortable doing that, because by the time you got a load of wet mud and you reached out, you were playing teeter-totter. Well, I just wasn't comfortable. It was like trying to stand on an old waterbed and do things. Well, that was the easiest way to explain it.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So you're sitting up there on all this mud and you're rocking back and forth. You know, you're pulling mud from this side, and then you're reaching out over somebody else's truck. So it's not your truck. So, you know, if you do happen to tip and put the bucket in the truck, you dent up their truck and stuff. So I was like, I'll just load from down on the ground. I can pull off the pile and I can load the trucks. That's not how you do it. I said, okay, I'm not comfortable on top. I'll load from down here. Well, it's so much slower doing that. You need to just learn to do this. was like, that's fine. You get on top of the pile, down at your end of the pile, and I'll stay up here on my end of the pile. And I'll see you in the middle. Well, when I beat him to the middle, and I never got on the pile once, and I was able to clean up my mess while they were down there using a dozer to keep pushing up everything he couldn't reach
Right.
as he was moving.
Okay.
Oh. I said, just because that's the way that the guys do it doesn't make it the only way you can do it.
Very good. Did you ever feel like a minority at work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But you kind of expect that.
It says share an experience or two, and I think that was a great story that you just shared. That's a great example of showing some different ways to approach a problem. Do you have any other examples maybe of something that's pretty overtly sexist that you want to share?
I mean, there's always comments, but you just kind of, I've got two brothers, so I had boys in the neighborhood growing up. I was the only girl, so I've always been one of the boys. So I can dish it out as well as anybody else.
Sounds good. Is there a proper facility for women to have privacy, such as restroom or locker room, at each of your work sites?
No.
No?
No.
So tell me a little bit about that for people that have never, tell me something a little about that.
On the big jobs, you have porta-johns.
Okay.
Some companies will get you a female porta-john. Other companies, it's just a porta-john. So you share it with all the guys and you read all the writings on the walls and whatnot. But no, I mean, there's, like when you're on a paving crew, you're moving all day long. You might start here and end up 20 miles down the road by the end of the day. So you'll never see your car again till the end of the day. You don't have porta-johns. You don't have anything. So you go beside the machine and yeah, I guess sometimes you can crawl in the back of a truck, like the asphalt trucks. Some of the truck drivers will let you crawl in the back of the truck and you just pee in the bed of the truck. They're just putting millings in there.
Oh, okay.
You know.
Uh-huh.
But other than that, you just pee next to the machine. I mean, the guys stand right there. I've had guys I've been on a roller before. Mm-hmm. Now the drums on the rollers are pretty good size. You know, they're 3 foot high. And they'll walk right up to the roller and stand there and talk to you right in your face. And I'm like, you are not peeing on my machine. Are you really? And they'll do just that. They'll start to laugh. And I'm like, are you seriously?
I shouldn't laugh, but it's...
But it got to be a running joke. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're on a hoe, you usually put the bucket and you squat between the tracks and the bucket blocks you in the front. But if they're not positioned correctly, they can still see you behind. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what? I got two cheeks just like you do. If looking at my white butt turns you on, I mean, so be it. I got a butt just like you got a butt. I said, you know.
Mm-hmm. So just out of curiosity, so you're moving around all the time in that scenario. Mm-hmm. When you have lunch, do you just stop for lunch and you have to pack a lunch?
Yeah, asphalt crews, you don't stop.
Okay.
You just eat between
you just grab
trucks. You just grab a bite whenever you have a bite.
Okay.
Jobs like this, yeah, you pack a lunch. Mm-hmm. Now this job does have vending machines inside, and there's 2 food trailers, so you can. Most days you can go in and buy lunch, but that doesn't always mean. You never count on that.
Okay.
Because if the vendor doesn't show up, then there's nothing for lunch. So if you don't pack your lunch, you pack whatever you want to drink, And you always count on, I'm working 8s, so you pack for 10. Or you're working 10s, you pack for 12. Because if they ask you to stay late and you're there, you better have something extra or you're just doing without.
Yeah. So we bounced around a little bit, but it's because I'm interested. So has anybody ever been like aggressive towards you at a workplace?
No. Said comments, but I mean, I was fortunate enough that the guy that made the comments was walking with a bunch of guys that I had worked with before, and they turned around and called him on it. You know, that's over the line. You crossed the line. And I was like, I just kept walking. I figured I'd just pretend I didn't hear him and just, you know, I wasn't even going to get into it. But the guys all stepped right in and...
And so now we're going to shift around a couple times. So I've asked you lots and lots of questions about operating. Did any of those questions hearken anything from your nursing days? Did anything come back from then about challenges with people or good things with people or interactions like that?
Yeah, I mean, I miss my nursing days. I enjoyed being a nurse. I just got burnout and stressed out and couldn't shut it off. And they were working shorter staff, and, you know, it was one nurse and one aide and one nurse and one aide, and then it was one nurse can do it all, we'll just give you 2 aides, and then it was like, and then why can't you get your stuff done? And we're not paying overtime, you can stay and do your charting on your own time, because you can't seem to get it done in the 8 hours. Well, you want me to do twice the workload, but, you know, these are people's lives. And you just can't do things like that. You know, I don't think they realize when they keep short-staffing the nurses that they're burning them out. And if your replacement doesn't show up, you don't go home. It doesn't matter what you've got going on at the house, whether you've got kids, you've got a babysitter, what? You don't go home, because that's patient abandonment. And they file charges against you.
Right.
I mean, so once you show up at work, yeah, you're supposed to get out of there at 3:30, or you're supposed to get out of there at 11. But if your replacement doesn't show up, you're there another 16 hours or until they can find somebody else to come in. And I had 2 little kids, and I couldn't do it anymore.
It's too much. Sure. Did you happen to be in a union when you were nursing also? Okay. So, are you married?
Yes.
And do you have children?
I have 2.
And or grandchildren?
And 2.
Very good. How did working affect your relationship with your husband? And that could go back as far as it makes sense to.
Well, when I was a nurse, I was married the first time. And there was lots of complications in that one. That was just a train wreck now. But it was hard because a lot of the time I was a single parent trying to nurse. I was trying to figure out everything and work afternoon turn, and so when we got divorced, I met my current husband. Was about the same time that I call it my midlife crisis. I quit nursing, I got divorced, I joined the union, the operators, and I mean, it was just a whole new ball of wax. And for the most part, he's been very supportive as far as, what I do, and brags, and that's kind of neat. He actually appreciates what I do.
That's good. How did working affect your children?
When my kids were growing up, I was a nurse. And a lot of times, I worked mainly afternoon turn.
Okay.
Because I worked in the mornings at a daycare, so I could have free daycare after school for my kids. And then I worked afternoon turn as a nurse, so they would get off the bus at the daycare, stay there until my mom would get off work, and she would take them back to her house, feed them supper, put them to bed, and then when I would get off at midnight, I would go back to her house, spend the night, and we'd get up and go back to daycare and start over again.
Do it again. Sure.
So
how
you miss a lot of after school activities working, afternoon turn. But it was the only shift that I could pick up and make everything work, not have to pay for daycare, and
Sure.
You just do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
We spent many nights doing spelling words over the phone on my breaks.
How did your network for childcare expand beyond? It sounds like you had it covered with the daycare and with your mom. Did it expand out of that, or that was the primary?
I mean, at one point I had a girlfriend that her and I moved in together. So it was her and I and our 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And she worked day turn and I worked afternoon turn. So then we just kind of took care of each other's kids, and we did that for a while too.
Sure.
So it's pretty much single parenting. You do what you got to do and to make it work.
Was it ever relevant that you were taking care of your own kids and also your parents at the same time?
No, I'm doing that now.
You're doing that now? Are you taking care of your grandkids and your parents at the same time?
No, unfortunately, my grandkids are in North Carolina and Texas, so I don't get to take care of them.
Gotcha. And you're still working, right?
Yes.
Great. Were there any accidents that you remember at any of the job sites that you could talk about? Or even nursing, whatever?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, tell me about it.
Oh, yeah. This is when the nursing comes in handy.
All right. Here comes the juicy story. Ready?
Oh, we were cutting a right-of-way in along Route 79 over in Pennsylvania, over by Grove City Outlets.
Okay.
We were widening that road and putting up the right-of-way fence. So they had me on a skid steer with a mower in the front of it. It throws everything forward. So the kid that was working with me, he would get a head start cutting down the bigger trees and stuff, because this will mow anything from 3 inches up.
Okay.
He had a chainsaw. He was out there cutting trees down, the bigger trees, so we could put the fence in. And he went to cut a tree down, and when he cut the tree, he had notched it, and the wind blew at the same time, and the tree started to come back. So he let go of the chainsaw with one hand and put his hand on the tree, and the chainsaw came down across his knee and just sliced through. Now, it didn't hit any bone. Fortunately, he was a bigger kid, so he had good meaty thighs. But it went right through all the meat. Well, he had chaps on, leather chaps.
Sure.
And I had just started mowing. And I see him come walking back, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? So I shut the mower off, and he comes walking back, and he said, I cut myself. And I said, okay. And he's like, no, the chainsaw kicked. And he said, and I caught my leg with the chainsaw. And I said, how bad? Because then immediately, I'm no longer an operator, now I'm a nurse. I said, how bad? And he started to pull up his pant leg, and his boot is just full of blood. His socks are full of blood. And I'm like, all right, just sit down. So I called the foreman, and I called the inspector out there, because those were the only two guys that were out where we were at. And the inspector showed up, and he said, I said, do you have a first aid kit? I need a first aid kit. I said, we got to get him to the hospital, but I need a first aid kit. He pulls out this first aid kit. It's got 2 Band-Aids in it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And he's like, well, I've been meaning to. I'm like, get out of here. Well, my truck is probably 3 miles down the road. But being a nurse, I've got a solid first aid kit in my truck. So, threw my keys at the inspector, and I said, go down there in the back of my truck, get my first aid kit, and get back up here. I said, in the meantime, call the foreman and tell him to either get out here or get an ambulance out here. We need an ambulance. Didn't believe me, so the foreman comes out. In the meantime, I'm pulling out pads and all kinds of things, and he's like, well, did you see how bad it is? And I'm like, the way it's bleeding, no. I'm not cutting off his pants. I'm not opening it up. I said, I'm just putting pressure on it and wrapping gauze and everything around it. And I was wrapping duct tape and everything else I could find, get my hands on, get pressure just to stop the bleeding till we could get him to the hospital. The foreman gets out and he says, well, how bad do you think it is? And he went to grab his pant leg and he hits the ground.
The foreman or the kid?
The foreman.
Just from the look of it.
I'm like, great, okay. So I looked at the inspector and I'm like, get him in the back seat and get him to the hospital. And they were like, well, we need to call his mom because she happened to be working on the job site, but she was at the other end, 10 miles down the road. I said, call her on the way to the hospital. Have somebody else pick her up and meet you at the hospital.
Yeah.
I said, you need to get him to the hospital, like now. He ended up with 300 and some odd stitches in his knee, but he didn't cut any tendons or anything.
Lucky.
And all the doctor could say was, I don't know who bandaged this up, but, and he was like, well, she's a nurse.
And he stayed conscious the whole time?
He stayed conscious the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good story.
But that's why I keep my first aid kit, because you just never know. I may never use it, but... And jobs drive me nuts when they pull out a first aid. That's always the first thing I check when I go on a job. Where's the first aid kit? Where's your first aid stuff? And this is not a first aid kit.
Yeah.
2 Band-Aids and a little bit of antibiotic ointment in a little pack doesn't qualify for a first aid kit.
Were there any episodes of violence anytime?
We had a couple guys get pissed off at work and bring a gun, but they also ran their mouth enough that security grabbed them and banned them from the sites before they could ever. Well, I got a gun in my truck. Keep this shit up. I'll just go out in my truck and get the gun. Okay, dummy. Mm-hmm. Number one, you're not allowed to have a gun on any job site. So just run your mouth a little more. But and we've had a couple convicts that work out of the laborers hall or whatever that have been wanted, and they came to the job site and found them.
So these guys that have warrants out and they come to work anyway, which, okay.
Right.
All right, fair enough.
So, it has happened, but never really anything I guess that's something, but
Okay.
it's not shootings like we're having nowadays.
Sure. Was being part of a local union beneficial to you and your coworkers?
Absolutely.
Sounds like it. Did the company promote individuals from the union in management, or did they hire from the outside of the union?
No, they hire from inside most of your foremen or, your superintendents or whatnot all belong in the union anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
They may be a different trade than you, but they all pretty much come, at one point in time or another, they were all union.
Inside. Okay, good. Is there a pension plan for you at work? Good. And you don't need to, you're not going to take advantage of it yet, but it's nice to
Getting
know.
close.
Yeah.
It's getting close.
Good for you. And it seems like you've had a very nice blend of majority positive experiences and some negative experiences, as everyone does in the workplace. For the guys with a more negative attitude, do you have a word that you would describe those types of guys with, like?
They're just old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always a guy's field. And, fortunately, there was a pretty good-sized handful of women that came in before me. So, they had slowly started to accept females being on the job site by the time I joined. But, there's still some of the guys that, you belong at home,
Yeah, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your working life? Just the whole span of your working life. Oh, I know. Before we get to that,
Okay.
I did want to ask you, so when your kids were small and you were making this adjustment, do you feel that, like I don't want to say pressure, but I can't think of a better word. Okay. The pressure to make this change when you were in nursing and it felt somewhat overwhelming, it seems like, and you have small kids at home and you're working on childcare. What all went into your decision to shift gears the way that you did?
Well, it was actually a bet with my little brother.
Okay.
Was how I ended up with the application. Because my dad was somewhat retiring, and this was kind of my stress relief. I'd be a nurse, but then we'd come home and we'd do little side jobs, driveways, whatnot, get out, work outside, blow off some steam. Mm-hmm. That was always my stress relief. Well, Dad was going to retire and not do this anymore. And my brother said, well, I'm going to join the union because Dad's going to quit working, doing all these side jobs, so I'm going to join the union. And I said, well, if you can do that, I can do it too. And he's like, well, go spend your $25 and go down and get an application. We'll see. So I went down and got my application, and we both went to Pittsburgh and took the test. And I got my acceptance letter 3 days before he did. And it was probably the best 3 days of my life ever. But we went through the apprenticeship program together. We were both in. We both graduated together. And we've both been in ever since.
The whole time.
And it's been good,
Yeah.
I mean, he's always ran equipment, so he was always a whole lot better than I was. But I was willing to learn, and he was willing to teach me a few of the tricks, or, I'd get on a job and I wasn't too sure what I was doing, so I'd call my brother and say, okay, hey,
Good. So did that test have scores?
No, we never got the scores.
I just thought I'd set you up for an easy one if it was out there.
No, we never got the scores, but just getting the acceptance letter 3 days before him was...
Well, yeah, just between you and I. We'll just assume that it was better and that's why you got it faster. Now I'll ask you if there's anything else that you'd like to add about your working life.
It's just been an amazing journey. It really is. I've had so much fun. And I love to see all these young girls now coming in, you know, and it being a little easier for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's real reassuring, especially being that I can retire in a couple years. It's nice to see that we are making a way for ourselves, you know, and the guys aren't so, you're a chick, you know. In fact, I've got a couple of foreman out on the job site that says, okay, we need you to do this like a lady, or we need you to do this over the guys, because women have finesse. They do it like a lady, where a guy does it just like a guy, you know.
Right. More heavy-handed for the guys and
Right.
more detail-oriented for the ladies.
Right.
Sure.
You know, when you have a truck that you need loaded, or, you know, things aren't just right and things have shifted and they're not just the way they're supposed to, they tend to come get one of us because we're a little bit easier, we're a little gentler, we're more like a lady. And that it kind of, you know, caught me off guard when he said, I need you to unload that like a lady. And I said, huh? And he said, it's going to take your finesse.
That's beautiful.
And I was like, oh, I'll have to remember that one.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Shirley. This has been wonderful.